Hello, 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 and welcome. I am Dr. E. Jean Pemberton. Thank you so much for listening to my podcast series that provides tips to maximize your summer research. Now, this particular podcast, it is part of a series, but I have broken the series down into three components. And within each component, there are additional subcomponents for each podcast. So I have already recorded two of the three podcasts and maximizing your summer research regarding the third and final podcast for this series on data collection and analysis. And my focus on this one is going to be on deep experimental work, deep experimental work. And just to remind everybody, of course, regardless of where you are in your semester as it relates to research, of course, my tips are available on the spring semester. But of course, if you're in the summer and you are not taking classes, or maybe you are coursework, these tips are still available for you to use. Okay. So, again, this is going to be a podcast. I am going to share tips on deep this when I do. So, my four tips and regarding deep experimental work is going to be on interpreting the results from your findings with existing literature, acknowledging the limitations of your experimental work, and then suggest future research to expand your research. Okay. So those are going to be more tips. Now, before I go into my different tips, I like to always provide you with a description, a narrative, or an explanation of what this particular focus is, the subject is all about. And so deep experimental work. So I have there a definition of what deep experimental work is, and I'm gonna add my little period there. Here we go. All right, so my perfectionist type thing. And so deep experimental work is experimental designs or work that involves a high level of control and complexity to investigate cause and effect relationships. And this is, of course, regarding your data, okay, your data collection. So there are basically three types of deep experimental research. Okay. I've researched also a little bit more into deep experimental work just for me when I was working on my dissertation, just to have an understanding. And there were some additional um, categories related to deep experimental work, but basically overall, after I did my own personal research, these were the three main ones. And so if you're doing your own research, which you should, my recommendation is that you do that, I'm just going to provide you with but the basic ones, and then whichever one works best for you, you can make that decision. Okay. So now the first one that I want to talk a little bit about is pre-experimental. Okay. Pre-experimental, which is a type of deep experimental work. And I have a description of what it is, which you can see my description. The simplest form is the simplest form of experimental research, often used as a starting point before more rigorous studies, before you do more rigorous studies. So they are typically don't include, when you do experimental work, typically it doesn't include a control group of comparison. Participants are not randomly assigned to groups, and these designs are often used to explore a topic or gather preliminary data before a larger, more robust study happens. And they can be a more budget-friendly way to conduct a preliminary investigation. I did a pre-experimental research with my survey. I think it's helpful as well because you can also determine if your approach or your method is working and providing you with the results that you're looking for. The approach. Also, I received recommendations. I actually did a pre-experimental research experiment with professors and colleagues. And then they provided me with feedback on how to improve my survey. With their feedback, I was able to gather more information, better information, deeper information to help me with my research. So pre-experimental, about doing that until my program chair, not my program chair, but my committee chair, she recommended me to do so. And so that was helpful for me with my survey. I think if I did not do a pre-experimental research work, then my survey would not have provided me with type of results, the data results that I needed, and I would have had to, go a different route. So pre-experimental is research is really helpful. Okay. And so one of my recommendations, and again, it's budget friendly for me. I used colleagues and my committee members, my committee chair, which was, again, cost effective, helpful, and they provided me with the feedback that I needed to improve my survey. The second type of deep experimental work is quasi-experimental. My description, and again, these descriptions are coming from where I looked them up. So I did not come up with my descriptions randomly. Just wanted to share that with you. So I looked at different explanations and just kind of put one together based on what I read. So quasi-experimental is a research method that uses manipulation of an independent variable, but does not involve random assignment of participants to conditions, and so it is not like or unlike true experiments, what I'm going to explain in just a little bit. So typically, it's often used when true experiments are not feasible due to ethical, logistical, or practical constraints. So sometimes people may take that approach of quasi-experimentals and use the data that they receive from quasi-experimental because of those reasons. So if you can do true experimental research, which is what we're going to go into next, that's highly recommended. But again, depending on circumstances, conditions, you might have to go with a quasi experimental method of research. And again, you can still receive the data. You just want to acknowledge the fact that if that's the route that you're taking, make sure that you acknowledge that. If you take the quasi experimental research approach, just make sure you acknowledge acknowledge that's your approach and reason behind the approach. Okay, so that when you have your audience that is reading your information, your research, they can understand why you decided to take that approach. Okay. The final or the third experimental work is true experimental research. True experimental research, again, this is often considered the gold standard. So it establishes cause and effect relationships by manipulating an independent variable and measuring its effect on a dependent variable. It involves random assignment of participants to control and experimental groups, ensuring the groups are initially similar. So again, true experimental research is considered the gold standard. And so as you are putting your research together and you are performing your data collection, you definitely want to acknowledge how you collected your data. What was your process? What was your process of deep experimental work? And again, in my last paper that my dissertation that I just recently last year, I did pre-experimental work and I did true experimental research work as well. So I used both of them. And again, pre-experimental was helpful for me to get the type of the results that I needed for from my true experimental research. Okay, so I wanted to provide you with that information, as I always try to give you something to launch into the actual tips that I want to offer you. All right, so let's get into our tips. We have 4 of them this time. So the first tip that I want to talk and discuss with you on deep experimental work, and this, of course, we are focusing on data collection and analysis. Oh, sorry about that. As interpret. Okay, so let's talk about what interpretation is and how this is going to help you as you are analyzing your data. So now, of course, at the end of the day, you should have already collected your data using your methodology, and you have the results of your findings from your data collection. Okay. Now, because you're not ready to get into this component of deep experience data collected, and you have the results of your findings. So pretty much your chapter 4 is written out, and you are transitioning into your chapter 5 if you're doing a mixed method or quantitative, or maybe even a qualitative paper. I'm not sure. But again, this is where the the neat and the nit and ingredients of your gritty of your research paper is all about. Okay, this is where we're looking at, okay, what's going on, what did you find out, what are the results. So you're interpreting the results. Okay, so let me discuss a little bit about interpreting the results, interpreting the findings of results from your findings. So your experimental outcomes should offer noteworthy implications. Again, you are adding knowledge, value to the body of knowledge, new knowledge to the body of academia. So that's important. Okay. So noteworthy implications means there should be a validation of your theoretical models. That means the results align with your theory, okay, or your theoretical model or your framework. So again, you should bring that the information about your theoretical model or your framework into this chapter, into your discussion when it comes to interpreting your findings. And then the next piece is unexpected outcomes. I spoke about this in other videos. So in particularly, you may have an interesting outcome. Say, for instance, if you're researching an apple tree, okay, an apple tree, and on the apple tree you gather apples, and all of the apples are red except for one. One apple that comes from that tree is a green apple. So that's an unexpected outcome. Okay, that is what we call an anomaly, a one-off, and this may indicate a previously unconsidered factor, which opens up new lines for inquiry. Okay. So you want to talk about any type of anomalies that, unexpected outcomes from your data research, your data collection, and share with, and that could also be part of further research or further future research. So again, unexpected outcomes. The third component of interpreting your data is methodology contributions. Your deep experimental approach adopted in your research should demonstrate the strength of your chosen methods approach in uncovering something in a way that is not immediately or obviously comprehensible. So the strength of your research methodology uses a rigorous experimental design, particularly when it involves frequent data collection. Okay, so by employing those techniques, you as a researcher, you are able to identify complex phenomena that might not be apparent with less rigor methods. So I'm going to, for an example given, is when I did my research on factors that motivated educators to stay and teach at a K through 12 school during a national crisis. When I was going through my results, what my results, findings, and interpreting my results, there were different types of um, themes that I was able to pull out based on the methodology that I used. So my methodology provided me with the type of contributions that I needed to be able to analyze my data through a rigorous process. Okay. And so I was able to provide my outcomes based on my methodology on my paper. Okay, in my paper, not on my paper, but through my research. So that's where that comes from. So again, interpreting the data is important when you are preparing to put together your deep experimental work. So validation of theoretical models, unexpected outcomes, and methodology comparisons. That's what interpreting the data is. My recommendation for interpreting data. All right, so now let's go to the second point, which is to compare your data with existing literature. Okay, comparison with existing literature. Hopefully you already have an established, a robust lit review, a chapter with lit review. Now, I have spoken to a few colleagues where the lit review for qualitative papers, some qualitative papers, it just depends on what your degree is. they didn't have to have it as robust. But again, it all depends on the program that you're in. It depends on the expectations of the department chair, that department that you're receiving your degree, and in partnership with your advisor or your committee chair. And I say advisor because you could be working on your master thesis. So, but lit review is, I don't know, it's a huge piece when it comes to any type of paper, that you're presenting, even if it's just for a journal. Lit review is critical. So now when you're doing your deep experimental work, you need to make sure that you have a robust literature, and you want to compare your results to literature that is available. So compare it to previous studies, such as like dissertations, other dissertations on your subject, master thesis, journal articles, case studies. This research should advance that field. Okay. Case studies can be found across a range of resources, including books, journals, professional magazines, databases, websites, and company websites, or their online. That is website, company websites, or online websites that may not be necessarily company based, but will have acknowledgments of case studies that have been found. Now, in my lit review, I think I have maybe 3 or 4, I can't remember, comparisons of methodologies that was used and the outcomes, and compared my existing results to results of research that were maybe 3 dissertations, case studies. I can't remember how many now, but I did do a comparison with existing literature. I saw some examples, and those examples were helpful for me when I was putting together the finalization piece of my results in my lit review and doing a comparison. So you want to make sure you do that. Comparison piece is really, really important. S- Most people say that challenging aspect of dissertation for many students is the lit review. Me, it was not the lit review, but I'd started my literature review early, which was recommended to me, and I'm so grateful that starting my literature review was started early, because when I got to the piece of my dissertation status, I had a good robust foundation for my lit review, and it was just expanding more on it and adding more components to my lit review. But I was already working on a foundation, which was helpful. So I could see the challenges if the literature review you did not start your lit review until you're starting your component of research. Then that's where the challenges is. So I would not recommend waiting until research time to build your lit review. If you already know what your thesis is going to be, if you already know what your research is going to be, you need to start gathering documentation, lit review, building your lit review, and making it as solid as possible so you can have a good reference for your lit review. Okay, so um, again, demonstrating new relationships or mechanisms that had not been empirically tested is going to be real helpful. So when we talk about comparing your results to with existing literature, you want the reader, or whoever is reading your information, to see, okay, this is what is existing. This is the literature that has been written on your particular thesis or your subject, and based on your findings, these are additional findings that will expand the future of the research, that expands the literature review that currently exists. That's what I need to say, that currently exists. So you want to compare the similarities, and then talk about what your outcomes are different or have expanded, and not necessarily so much different, but expands the conversation, of your thesis based on literature review that exists. Okay, so that's going to be helpful. And if you are not sure how to structure literature review, I would say get with your advisor, get with your program chair, talk to colleagues or professors. Start your process of building a literature review right now, early in the program, so that you have something to work with, a foundation to work with your literature review. All right, so number 2 was comparison with existing literature. The next Number three is my third tip for deep experimental work is limitation, scalability, instrumentation, bias, controlled environments. Despite the strengths of deep experimental work, listen, you will have several limitations and they should be acknowledged. Again, full transparency is important. That shows the growth of you as a scholar. So you're going to have limitations, okay? Scalability means the intensity and resource demands of deep experimentation may limit scalability. You may not be able to scale it. Or generalize. You may have to scale it or you may not. Generalization sometimes happens. Replication across larger or more diverse samples. Um, uh-oh, my Wi-Fi is acting weird. Okay, sorry about that. Uh, um, could enhance external validity. So again, deep experimental work. Second piece under that category is instrumentation bias. Although high resolution tools were employed, any systematic bias in measurements could affect outcomes. So talk about the instrumentation bias. Again, even your personal bias can be part of limitations. The third one under that section is controlled environment. Highly controlled nature of the experiments, while useful for isolating variables, may not fully capture real world complexities. So controlled environments, it could be interviewing, or if you're outside, right? And you're doing experimental work outside, but you have a controlled environment to protect nature, to protect the environment that you're in. So you may have different limitations for that. Okay, so that's number three. Number four, my fourth tip, and hopefully we can get you can see it, but I can continue to talk about it. It's gonna come through. I have Wi-Fi issues going on. I'm so sorry. Sometimes it happens that way. Technology limitations, right? The fourth point is deep experimental work is implications. Implications, and let's talk about what that. So the first bullet points I have is expand the experiment. Okay, expanding the experimental model to include new variables, and this is for fruit. We're talking about implications. I'm sorry, implications for future research. So the first implication for future research is to expand um, the experimental model where you can get add new variables, change the conditions, increase the population or adjust the population. For me, my expanding of the experimental model was my focus was on educators, Black educators who taught at a K through 12 school. So I did not interview educators who taught on a college level. I also only interviewed educators who were teaching prior to the COVID-19 and continue to teach. Most of my participants were in the states that I live in. So I would have loved to have a diverse population across the states, and the majority of them, of course, was in the area that I lived. So expanding, adding, adjusting my population would have been real helpful for, and is helpful for future research. Developing automated or AI assisted methods to reduce the time and labor demands of deep experimentation. AI is important, artificial intelligence. I know we think of it in a sense of what we've seen on television, but artificial intelligence is really helpful with time. It also, using AI can be more um, specific in providing you with the results that you can use to help you with analyzing your data. So I am becoming more aware of what AI is, because sometimes we think about artificial intelligence, we think of more robotics, but it's just a system that's put into place to help reduce your time, and where you can also put your energy and effort into something different if you can put technology in place. And that's what artificial intelligence is. It's just using technology to be able to help you with your data collection, data analysis, interpreting the data, and being more efficient and effective with your process. Okay. The third component for implications for future research is integrating these experimental insights with simulation or theoretical modeling to test broader hypotheses. I did, my hypothesis was Hertzberg's hypothesis. That's what I used to help do my methodology. And And of course, I was focusing on um factors that motivate. So my focus was motivation to stay and remain employed in a particular field during a national crisis. There were other hypotheses that were available for me, or theoretical models. I did speak of those in my research, and then I also provided my reasoning or a narrative as to why they were good, but the one that I chose was better for me in regards to the outcomes that I was looking for. But definitely, to further research, I can, align with my data to see how they align with the other theoretical models and provide broader hypothesis, or even build upon that and create my own hypothesis, which is what I'm working on. All right, so those were the 4 tips that I have for deep experimental work. And I'll just go over them one more time so that you can have a snapshot. The first one is to interpret the results from your findings. The second one was to compare the results from your findings with existing literature. The third is to acknowledge the limitations of your experimental work. And then the fourth is, again, to suggest future research to expand your research or research implications, which is what I talked about. All right. So now my final tips, I always like to share this with you. And this is the wrap up. This is the wrap up of data collection and analysis. In conclusion, let me just say this. Deep experimental work contributes significantly to the empirical foundation of your field, whatever you are researching, okay? It not only confirms key theoretical expectations, but also provides novel insights that challenge and refine existing models. While limitations exist, the depth and rigor of the experimental approach offer a solid platform for continued research and innovation. And that's what this is all about, right? So now my final tips to you and for you is I always like to tell you to make sure that you set clear, achievable goals. As you can see, the notepad and pen, cup of coffee because I'm a coffee drinker. And I love plants, so I have plants around me as well. Please make sure that you write down your goals. Even for me, as I am on the weekend recording. I am revamping my goals just to make sure that I am hitting, making, achieving my goals. And then I'm also writing down how I plan to achieve those goals, my steps. And then I put those steps into particular days so that I can have my checkoff list. I'm just very just proactive with organizing myself. And there is use tools to stay organized to make sure that I have my I's dotted, my T's crossed so that I can achieve my goals. So set clear, achievable goals, use tools to stay organized. And then number 3, I love to allocate time for a little fun. I always share this with you. You want to have fun. As a matter of fact, I was thinking in my mind today after I get through with my recordings and putting these videos together for my colleagues, for my colleagues in this wonderful field of academia. I need to get outside and have a little fun. So make sure you have fun because that is going to help you to reset the clock, to get stress out of your system and be able to refocus on what you need to do in order to get yourself to the finish line of your master's program or your doctoral program. Well, hopefully these 3 videos that I have shared with you are helpful to you in regards to data collection and analysis and as it relates to your summer research. Okay. For more information and some details and some things about what I shared, I'm going to add to my website just a couple of checkoff lists that you can use as a guide that I use as well. So I'm working on putting that together, as well as a link to my book that I'm finalizing. So I'm really, really excited about all of that. My website is endaseducation.com. That's endaseducation.com. All right, now to my colleagues, make sure you take advantage of this unique opportunity to move forward with your project this summer in a focused and intentional way. And at the end of the day, have fun and happy researching. Don't forget to make sure that you share this video, like this video, this podcast, and then make sure that you please subscribe to my channel so that you can receive notifications of future podcasts. Have an amazing day and happy researching.